Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Pielka. Today's November 29, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Jon H. Is that the way you pronounce your last name?
Yeah, just like the word, just like something else.
Something else. Jon, it is an honor, truly an honor and a pleasure to be here. Where in the heck are you calling in from?
I'm in the mountains about 40 miles south of San Francisco, near a little town called La Honda, up at the end of a gravel road. Lived here for 60 years.
Oh, go ahead.
We've lived here for 60 years.
60 years. Wow. How many years you been married?
62.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, my wife and I met when we were babies.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Why does it not surprise me that you asked that question? I didn't do much due diligence, but I did a little bit. I've been thinking about that, and all I could come up with were things that sounded like a college graduation speech, follow your dreams, junk.
Yeah.
Or something, those inspirational things you see on the walls in corporate boardrooms.
Yeah.
Teamwork. But not. I think it's a great question, and the fact that I can't really give an answer is probably a good sign for philosophers. But it depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
Is it from the perspective of me, the human being? If that's the case, probably the most important thing is just not to be dead. I mean, actually be here to engage with you on this lovely afternoon.
Yeah.
If it's from the perspective of the planet, it's probably the most important thing is for all of us human beings to be dead, so we can let the planet begin to recover from the ravages we wrought on it. If you're God, probably the most important thing about being a human being is to make more human beings.
To reproduce. I had that answer last week. A guy goes to reproduce. Yeah. If you're God,
to reproduce and then praise God. But how would you answer that?
Oh God, when people flip them on me, it's like I have 40 years of answers, and one of my favorites was right there in Berkeley, across the street from where Peter Dale Scott lives, and I asked this elderly lefty, and he goes, "Pizza."
Okay, yeah.
And then I had a 12-year-old kid say pizza later. Anyways, it is beautiful that you put it, because it's all about the context. It's breaking it down like that. That's really important. Buñuel said it too well. Long live the living.
Long live the living. Okay. Yeah. Well, it depends on who you're talking about. If you're
right. Not to be dead.
Strange our social services network for the elderly, it's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of what we'll be going into. So what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Unmediated at all. If I had my choice, I would, simply walk through Times Square or through the woods where we live, and I would just smell things and see things and pick up the dirt and smell it and smell the neon in Times Square. I like direct sensory input. Now, if you're asking, where do I get my news? I get it from the good elite sources. I read the New York Times, I listen to NPR. I actually go out of my way to read conservative media. Sometimes, I read the National Review. There's a wonderful, strange little magazine called the Hoover Digest, the Hoover Institution at Stanford, and it's got sort of the thinking people. There's a wonderful blog called Tom Dispatch by a wonderful editor in New York, Tom Engelhardt. So it's kind of all over. I learn a lot from documentary films, actually, for better or for worse.
That's funny, because Michael Morse says the Wall Street Journal, or as I call it, the Wall Street Urinal, is
Yeah.
the enemy's tip sheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was good. When you read it in New York Times, is it hard copy or online?
Well, we get the hard copy on Sunday because
Yeah,
I like the smell of books. I like the smell of
yeah,
newspaper. But I'm weakening on that just because of the trees. It's all the
yeah,
stuff we were dancing around the ferry pole in the 1960s, worrying about cutting down trees, and it's true.
yeah.
Daily, I read the whole paper daily. Go to the
Wow.
website. I'm fortunate that because I taught in a journalism school for years, I get a lot of free newspapers, so I get the whole thing. Try to read the whole thing, and I read the London Review and I read the New York Review. It's all this pointy-headed stuff. New
Yeah.
York Review of books.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Why do we gather information?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's fun.
Yeah.
I have a suspicion that we, in fact, more often than not, do learn from information.
Yeah.
I mean, you can talk to biologists and physicians, and we have to collect a certain amount of information so that we know to get out of the smoke from the burning poison oak, and we
Yeah.
know to get out of the way of the tigers, and we have to understand which spiders with the red spot on their stomach are our enemy. So there may actually be an evolutionary component to.
Well, that is the question next. Is it more innate or more invented to collect information?
Right. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I won't let that stop me as a, as a know-it-all white male. We answer the questions. It's probably both.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of these at the beginning are easily answered both, but it's fine. However you want. This one is, I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
That's an interesting one. Well, I said in jest a moment ago that I would answer the question as a know-it-all white male.
Yeah.
And I think more often than not, men know what they think the minute they think it.
Yeah.
I wish that I had cultivated the skill of pondering thought longer and more seriously than I did. I mean, there's some folks. Well, it's interesting in our conversation how seldom I had stopped to ponder your questions.
It is very interesting because I put on my interview suggestions, silence is okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just sit and go like this, and you can feel the tension because people think when you're talking, you're supposed to answer right away. And I want them to feel like you can. But that is a good answer. I don't know what I think until I ponder it. But you're saying that's what you think you should say.
Is that inspirational? One of the most wonderful moments in documentary film, actually, I mean, we can have a longer discussion about Ken Burns, but in Ken Burns' film about jazz, which definitely warrants a much longer discussion.
Yeah.
Wynton Marsalis is asked to define jazz.
Yeah.
And he says, jazz is like when the hero was sent out on a mission, but the filmmakers, the editor, had the nerve to keep the pause in there. It's the longest pause in all of documentary history, and the silence says more than Ken Burns or Wynton Marsalis could possibly say.
It's a really good example because it really illustrates Thelonious Monk saying, silence is the loudest sound in the universe.
Oh, yeah. If you talk to Ira Glass about his groundbreaking work on radio. He talks a lot about silence.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about not bringing music in at the moment that people expect music.
Yeah.
And the tensions that arise from that. Yeah.
Well, John, this is McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And
Okay.
Talk about white male. And then Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Okay.
So it is into it, do thoughts create emotions?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, those are two very, very smart people.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to know what, the guy who drove the gravel truck past my house this morning thought, or the checker at the, at the supermarket.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, I think I'm probably more in Didion's camp.
Yeah.
I think they're both true, and when you say I don't know what I thought, there are levels of that knowledge of what we said. I mean, how many times have you said something and it in fact was an unintended double entendre and you didn't realize it till after you'd left the party and you had, dissed the host.
Whoops.
And then you go write it down and you have to send them an apologetic.
John, that's Bob Dylan learned from the Bible. Don't ever tell anyone everything you know. Like if I met you at a party and I didn't know you were, if I didn't know you were John the filmmaker, I would start talking. I was like, I want to know everything you know, and I want to tell you everything I know. And then you start getting into that area where it's like, whoops, I probably shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. Two overeducated white men walk into a bar. Right?
Well, do thoughts create emotions?
No.
Yeah.
That's well, great. It's if I think back to once in a while when you're working in film, in documentary, I can't speak for fiction film because I haven't done much of it. When you're working in documentary, sometimes you get choked up, you get emotionally and it's happened a few times in my career, and almost every time, in fact, every time, it has involved music. It happens to be verbal music. And so it has been, I mean, I think emotions tend to get, it's when two wires cross, and one wire is your entire history as a human being.
Yeah.
All that stuff that AI is stealing from us now and repurposing. It's your entire history that's lodged in your brain. And then there's some trigger that pops it loose. I mean, I'm talking like I'm an expert, and I'm not. I mean, this has just been my experience over the years.
Well, that's what I'm after, is more your hunch, your guess, as McLuhan called it, he says your percept over your concept.
Okay.
Percept is intuition and feeling more so. And so that doesn't mean it's right. He said it best. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong.
Yeah.
He said it as a question. Woody made him say it as a statement in Annie Hall.
That's right.
He exposed McLuhan to the world backwards. But then McLuhan has a great line that is applicable. A half a truth is still a lot of a truth.
It's a lot of the truth. Yeah. Well, David Webb Peoples, wonderful screenwriter. I'd suggest him as a guest, by the way. He wrote Blade Runner. He edited The Day After Trinity.
Yeah.
And he always said that in film, his job was to make the audience cry when the character is not crying.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
And that's been, I certainly tried to do that. I mean, the other thing, I did a little bit of work with Marlon Riggs, not enough, but a little bit before he died. I did some camera work for him.
Yeah.
And Marlon was the first guy who ever took me aside and said the obvious, which is if the character is beginning to get emotional, don't zoom in.
Oh, wow. Why is that now?
Well, the emotion will take care of itself. All you're going to
don't zoom in.
All you're going to do is wreck it.
Yeah.
You're going to ruin it if you try to think that you know better than the character. I mean, you're going to break a fourth wall and all that stuff. You're going to do a lousy Zoom, which is going to be distracting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I was on a documentary shoot and the woman started to cry. And I was like, as soon as we cut, I goes, "We got the money shot." And the guy goes, "Shut up." You know?
trafficking human. We
And
traffic.
I didn't try to put her, on the spot or, insult her or whatever. Because, my mom taught me that crying does two things. It gets emotional release out, but it also gets toxins out of your body. The tears,
Okay,
yeah.
I will buy that. Yeah.
Yeah. Can humans think without language?
We have no way of knowing. I mean, have you ever met a human who doesn't have language? Answer that question. I mean, that's a Noam Chomsky question, right?
Well, that's you got ESP because the next question is Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's culture, tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. So then I morphed on the question is, John, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Yeah, well, that's a different problem than thinking without language.
Yeah.
Well, I do it all the time, and every filmmaker does it. That's one of the reasons we're making films and not writing books. I mean, I'm writing books now because filmmaking has become too hard. But yeah, I mean, you weave together these what we hope are eloquent moments where you have images and sound that were and the everything that preceded it in the film for the setup, the emotional setup. Those things all conspire. And boom, there's a cognition or there's an emotion or a revulsion that pops right up. I mean, the first films for the first, I don't know, probably half of cinema's existence, there was no language. I mean, there was language written on the screen, but yeah, I mean, I love moments in films. Well, as long as we brought up Ken Burns.
Yeah.
And the eloquence of that moment in the jazz series.
Yeah.
The problem with the jazz series is that people won't shut up. The narrator will not let you just listen to Ella Fitzgerald's eloquence.
Yeah. Well, that's that woman or that French team. I think they're French that made the Thelonious Monk film. They let him play for 90 minutes. It's like, okay, we got a few minutes of talking heads.
Yeah. Well, also, yeah. I mean, what's her name? Sarah Bernstein's film about Ella Fitzgerald has 3 minutes. What's that film? Is it Straight No Chaser? Is that the Thelonious?
It's not. I don't think it's Straight No Chaser. It's Christian Blackwood. I think it's the filmmaker, the Monk film. But the Ella, I love that because the last shot over the credits is her just ripping it up, scatting like, and it's like, yeah. But they says, well, we can't put this in the middle of the film. We'll just roll it over we'll have the credits roll over it, so we won't edit it.
How can we just?
I showed a Curtis Mayfield doc once where all it was performance for 2 hours. And it was like, they couldn't sell it or anything, but that's because they were a stock house, reeling in the years productions. They had so much great, it's like, that's what I wanted to see, but anyways, your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's some titrated balance of the two. And I would guess that it changes from person to person and society to society and gender to gender and community to community. I mean, it raises the interesting question, have our emotions or our thinking been more beneficial to us, or phrased differently, which has gotten us in the most trouble?
Yeah.
Look at this moment number one, in the nuclear arms race, and number two, in the situation in Gaza. You know, which of those two is, I mean, they're battling. They're like on the plains of heaven, the plains of Armageddon, thought and emotion, slugging it out.
80% of people say, well, we're more, this is how they answer. I think we're more feeling beings. They literally say that 80% of the time. But I always say, well, listen, we invented these two words. We think we can separate it, but we can't really separate it. Because we invented the words, we're more thinking and we're more feeling. But I love Bridget Bardot saying, when I make love, I don't think. And I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off completely when you're doing the most sensuous thing your body could do, probably?
Yeah, that's a really interesting. It's interesting. We live up in the mountains, and we heat our house with wood. And I cut and split all the wood every year myself. I have for decades. And it's not quite the same as Brigitte Bardot making love, but when I'm splitting wood, it's the closest thing to clearing my cluttered brain of mentation, and clearing my cluttered brain of, it's just, it's a sort of the most wonderful kind of erasure.
Yeah.
I suspect that's, what she's
My
talking.
friend does it when he's sweeping. He told me, when I sweep the floor, that's what I do. And now every time I sweep the floor, I do that. I get into this like conscious breathing mode where you're just, So these are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
That's when I'm not going to play the overeducated aging white man card. I have no idea.
That's totally okay. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Well, what is it to think? I mean, obviously there's some kind of something approaching thinking, approaching mentation that machines do. I mean, that's the little slow motion atomic bomb that's blowing up in our face right now. That one I don't know. There are people who know. I mean, there are people who get paid. Well, they don't get paid a lot of money. They they think about that a lot. I'm not one of them.
Well,
I worry about it.
Yeah, this guy on Pacifica yesterday said a great line. He said, most everybody I talk to, most my peers are freaked out. AI is going to ruin us. I was like, it's just another tool. Okay. And they're cautious. It's going to take our jobs or this or that. And the guy on Pacifica said, we should treat AI like children because it's in its infantile stage, and we could raise a good child, or we can raise a druggy, no good neck kid who loses it, or, whatever. So I thought that was an interesting approach, but we'll see what happens.
I'm not so sure. And I'm writing a book now about nuclear testing and about, fears of nuclear war in 1950s and 60s, and on up through the end of testing in the 90s, and nuclear fallout, and all the real serious existential problems that we face. That it's you remember them, I remember them, my grandkids have no idea. And there are, of course, a lot of comparisons between nuclear weapons and AI, especially with the Oppenheimer film coming. And the reason I'm skeptical about what you just said is that the atomic bomb did not involve profit, and it did not involve venture capitalists, and it did not involve investment bankers. And I think in that sense, AI is different. And if
I see, that's a good point.
What just played out at OpenAI was over that issue. I mean, it developed this, full tilt for maximum profit, or are we going to put the brakes on and raise it like a beloved infant? And the beloved infant lost out in that one, I think.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to your book. Your book, that's important. You've got a lot of background there. So, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Meaning? Oh, both. Why,
Yeah.
it's not an either or,
Yeah.
not by a
Well,
long.
well, Viktor Frankl says in Man's Search for Meaning, he says happiness doesn't tend to last and meaning does.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, huh. Happiness. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, a lot of that I think is cultural and situational, and what your station in life is. I mean, you and I are privileged. I figure, we're
Yep.
here on this Zoom call talking about high ideas. If we were, uh, in Gaza, or, in a ravaged kibbutz, or on the street, down the street from you in Venice, or down in one of the towns near me, I think we would have a different balancing of what those were.
Yep. What no, does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Yeah,
I'm glad you're laughing, dude. We got to have fun here too.
I vividly remember the moment in college in a calculus class when I said, I cannot do this. I can't remember. And boy, these are big time Kierkegaardian questions.
Well, I'm just after your hunch, so it's all right. Okay, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, no contest, light.
Wow. Okay, here we go. This is Audre Lorde, the poet. You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can't. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Well, I agree with Yvonne. Well, I agree with both of them.
Yeah.
I think that it was the master's tools that built the master's house in the first place. And so Audre Lorde is correct about that. Yvonne Rainer, transparency is everything. And I think for probably the last 30 years, every documentary I've made has at least some reference to me. And I don't mean that they're autobiographical, and I don't mean that they're about me, but my voice is in them. Occasionally you'll see me, in the mirror. And the point is to let the viewer know that the glaciers didn't leave it this way. God didn't make this documentary. There was actually a functioning person with a set of tools. I sometimes will make it a point to have the sound man, sound woman, sound person in the frame.
Yeah.
And there are times when you want to, in fact, retreat from that, and you want to suck people into this fever dream of your movie with no, you want to have all four walls intact. But I think that a lot of the troubles we've gotten into, particularly in documentary, are from lack of transparency.
Yeah, that's good. That's a couple things. My friend's watching every Frederick Wiseman film, and he caught one where you could see the boom mic. and then Jean Rouch says, if I put a camera between me and you, it's more true if there's no camera there.
Wait a minute, say that again. He said,
if I put a camera between me and you, I put a Zoom screen between me and you, it's more true than if there was no Zoom screen. So, I tested this, having put on discussions like this for 40 years. And then for the last 3-4 years, they've been all on Zoom.
Yeah.
And I still talk to people in person. They're better and more real on Zoom because our heads are framed in our voice and we're more present. I found a pattern that people are more present and attentive in a Zoom. So it's sort of like what Jean Rouch is saying. If I put a camera between me and you, I think what he's saying in the big picture is if I put spoken word between me and you, it's more true than what you referenced earlier, direct experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, he certainly thought about that as much as any of us. Um, but two thoughts. I mean, the camera that we employ, we think of it as a receptive device, but it's also projects a force field. It, in
Yeah.
fact, presence of the camera, as you well know, and as you just described, actually does affect how we present
Yeah.
ourselves. How sort of performative task are we? How does it, um, you know, skew our performative task? The other is I had a really interesting experience recently. I was interviewed by the Kitchen Sisters, um, Davy Nelson and Nikki Silva, and they, uh, the woman who did the interview, whose now my name I now forget, a young producer of theirs, she did a very interesting thing. We, as filmmakers or as Zoom makers, we sit down and we have people facing the camera, and the interviewer is present, is there. In you're looking at the interviewer, or in my case, the person I'm interviewing is looking at me, and we
Yeah.
have all sorts of hoops we jump through about don't look in the camera, or don't look me in the eye, or repeat my question in your answer. But what this young producer did, since it was radio, she had me sit next to her on the couch. And I was looking out into the room.
Yeah.
And she made it, I realized afterwards, she was very cagey. She got herself and her microphone out of my eye line. You know, when you go to the dentist always keeps the Novocaine needle out of your eye line.
Yep.
They sneak up and then bang. Well, and it was completely liberating. I mean, I've been interviewed a lot.
Yeah.
And completely liberating because I could just sort of stare off into space. It was liberating also because it was not live, it was radio. Time was immaterial.
Yeah.
I could fracture time, I could jump around, but mainly not being confronted with the camera's force field.
Yeah.
It was delightful. We can't do that in
that force field word is great. So you said both of your points. The camera was receptive and force field.
Yeah.
And so here's what you stimulated. Really important, John. I appreciate it. Is Errol Morris invented that in Terratron.
Yeah.
And so he can get you, McNamara, to look directly into the camera, and then it's connecting with the viewer. Whereas, it's just that little hair. My eyes of the camera, the interviewer is just above, but I want you to look directly in but the guy's going to eventually look up at you and lose it. So he invented that. So when he did the promo for the Oscars, you can watch it on YouTube, and he did people like Eddie Murphy and Sean Connery and asked them, why are movies good, important? They said, you want me to look you in the eyes? I'm a professional looking into the glass lens.
Yeah.
They fought it because they've trained to look into the glass lens.
Yep. Well, there's that was a famous, wonderful piece that he did. That I mean, Errol's a genius. We only have maybe 2 or 3 geniuses in what we do, and Errol's one of them.
Yeah.
But there's another element to the Terratron.
Yeah.
Which is this, black box. I was on the set when Errol was doing commercials for Barack Obama, and he had he always works after hours with a film crew from, say, a commercial that he's been doing, and everybody stays on for a couple hours, and then they work on one of these, good cause promos or one of Errol's documentaries. So I was on the set, and what would happen, he had about 25 young people that they'd recruited to come in and do Errol testimonials to camera. And the Terratron is set up, which is this big device that goes on the front of the camera, and the person who's being interviewed looks into it. Errol is 50 yards away on a soundstage inside a completely enclosed, black curtained sanctum. And when these young people come in, he does not come out and greet them. He doesn't shake hands. There's no chit chat. There's any of that normal. No, I wouldn't say normal. There's none of that routine, expected, sort of social grease.
Yeah.
So it must be a very, very odd experience because you're talking, it's like the man behind the curtain. It's like Oz.
Yeah.
And the other, well, so that was one thing that was a real eye opener about the Interrotron, that Errol is physically not present. The other is that he yells the questions from his black tent. There's not like a sound system that, so he's screaming from behind this tent.
Oh.
Uh,
Well, it's sort of like a Zoom, but you don't have to yell because he's
it is sort of like, it is sort of like a Zoom.
yeah.
So but the only, well, it's true. Yeah. The only experience that you and I have of each other is electronic.
Yeah.
Right. I can't offer you part of my coffee.
Yeah, it's what McLuhan called discarnate state. We're without bodies.
Yeah.
But that's when you were on the telephone. When you're on a Zoom, you still have this sight thing going.
Yeah.
There's
There's all kinds of nonverbal stuff, body language. If I'm talking to you like this, it means one thing. If I get really fired up and don't even
the guy I interviewed yesterday, I couldn't figure out. He did this for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And he said, I was leaning into my speakers to hear you. And I just thought that was his personality. And I says, artist, you want to look up at the camera? He goes, oh, I didn't realize. So I didn't want to invade his body language. And then 20 minutes later, he all of a sudden realized, I didn't mean to do that. So it was like, how are people going to take that? Like, why? And I take notes. So I'm looking down like this and taking notes. And people literally put on the comments, dude, you're not paying attention. And it's funny because it is taking away from me being attentive to your body language and everything by looking down and taking a note. It is true, but so what new tool that got us off on Audre Lorde and Yvonne? The question was, what new tool do you suggest?
Well, the obvious things are, the digital transformation that's happened over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
When we shot, I did the camera work on that series called Eyes on the Prize about the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And when we shot that, a roll of 16 millimeter film, which would be 11 minutes, we'd go out in the field, and for every 11-minute roll that we shot, it was about $250 in 1980 dollars, by the way.
Yeah.
By the time it got, you purchased the film and processed it and got it all ready for editing. And it weighed, I don't know, like 1.5 pounds. That 11 minutes of imagery and sound now weighs literally nothing.
Yeah.
It's just rearranged
Yeah.
electrons. If I have my physics right, I think it's just the electrons get rearranged and their repolarized quantum states change or something. It weighs nothing. And it costs almost nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's deceiving because, documentary films cost just as much, if not more, as they always did.
Yeah.
The digital editing is interesting. I mean, that was a giant step, it was a real, rip in the history of editing. About when did we start editing digitally? 25 years ago, maybe. Cadillac Desert was the first thing I did that was edited digitally. And the difference there, I mean, we all edit digitally now and we all love it. The ease with which we can change things, I think, is not always beneficial.
That's exactly what a major Hollywood director said. When I used to wait for the, what do you call that thing to spin around and rewind the film?
Yeah,
the flatbed.
Yep.
I could think and reflect.
Yeah.
Now there's 5 editors, and so.
Yeah, Walter Murch is great on that.
That's right. Walter is.
He would be a great guest, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's odd. I think the I love digital shooting. I mean, my iPhone now makes images that are vastly better
Yeah.
than what, my $100,000 film camera did even 10 years ago. The problem, filmmaking is all, at least documentary making, is all about eliminating things. A close-up, as Ricky Leacock said, is all about what's not in the frame. It's tight. As you're forging a story on film, it's all about what you've taken out.
Yeah.
And if you were to edit this session, which is going to go on for, I don't know, 6 hours or 10 hours or 10 minutes.
No, it's an amazing thing.
When do we, you have to get rid of stuff. And at what point in the process do you do that? And we used to do a lot of that selection actually in the field while we were shooting, simply because it was this giant taximeter.
Yeah.
Running. I mean, you could hear it. You could hear, if you were close to the camera, you could hear the little clickety, 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 and every click was, $1 going by. It was another $1 you had to raise with great agony. Now we just fire hose all day long.
John, your advantage there, just really sorry to interrupt, is that you experience both. The kids now who are making films never experience that, and some of them do it as a retro thing, but being able to compare the difference, and you can see the big picture because they both have services and disservices.
Yeah.
And that's like when you suss out the big picture. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I will contradict myself there that occasionally in the fire hose, there's something that pops up that you wouldn't have got in if you had been doing a much more surgical kind of interview. I mean, the dirty secret about a lot of interviews, maybe most, is that we know what we want to get. We know before we walk in there.
Yeah.
We're not, it's unlike a scientist. I mean, a scientist is longing for discovery. We do very little discovery. Especially on historical documentaries. There are two kinds of documentaries. There are observed documentaries, cinema verite, Maisels, Weisman, some of the stuff I've done. And then there are constructed documentaries, it's the historical things. It's Night and Fog and Ken Burns and to some extent, and Errol's films, which are about events in the past. And I lost my train of thought when we're.
Oh, is that direct cinema? You were saying that, yeah. Because that's like fly in the soup and fly on the wall. That's what I like. So observational is fly on the wall.
Yep.
The other one's fly in the soup.
Yeah.
But Peter Davis said it. Hearts and Minds, the first documentary I ever showed as a curator, and I'm so proud because it's a great film. He said the dilemma or the challenge is when to shut the camera off.
Well,
and with digital, my friend is running digital once and filming me, and he goes, "Oh, my chip just ended, but keep talking because my audio is still going." I was like, "That's amazing." So you should always have an audio thing going all the time because then you can.
Yeah, we used to do that. I mean, shooting 16 millimeter film, we used to do that sometimes. We would record some stuff with audio only just because it was cheaper. If we knew that there was going to be something that we could put on the screen, for that audio to complement and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Let's go with the tool is digital transformation. What new toy do you suggest?
Well, in my line of work and doing documentary, we only talked about toys when we stepped out of our documentary world. A lot of documentary makers, including myself, we have day jobs we shoot commercials, we shoot, educational stuff, we shoot industrials, we do second unit work on feature films. And whenever I would step out of, like when I was doing Oz and the Prize with Henry Hampton in Boston, and we didn't have money to buy lunch on that, I would step out and go do a Nike commercial. and fly to Rome. And I mean, it was obscene the amount of money that was available. And that's when we talked about toys, because then
Yeah.
we would have the big cranes and we would have all the
Yeah.
dollies we wanted. And if you wanted a few more extras, uh, you could ask for them. I mean, I did these mostly as a camera person, not as a director, and that was where the toys came in. And the rental houses would always talk about the latest toy, but let me get back to you on that.
Yeah, that's fine. And it doesn't, again, putting the question in the context you want, it doesn't always have to relate to filmmaking. It's just, they can go, but you go wherever you want with that. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Well, I don't worry. Robert McNamara during the Cuban Missile Crisis talks about how he was astounded when he woke up on Sunday morning after the big showdown on Saturday night.
Yeah.
I don't worry about waking up in the morning. I don't worry about nuclear war. I mean, we can talk more about that. That's an interesting place to go. Well, as you get older, I think you worry less.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the benefits of, partly because, living in North America, we've been, growing up during the 50s and the 60s and being of a certain class, we've been insulated from a lot of the things to worry about. We don't worry about food security. We don't worry about having a roof. We don't worry about all the basic things that much of the world worries about. I worry about climate change, just like everyone else. That's,
Yeah.
my grandkids don't worry about nuclear war.
Yeah.
And we worried about it 24/7 when I was in middle school and in high school. And it was just all over the news. You could watch the nuclear bombs in Nevada. Everything was on high alert and we knew it. My kids, part of the reason it's nice growing old is you can see that humans, for all their failings, actually do work some things out.
Yep.
We actually did negotiate all those treaties. So I don't worry about that. And I tell other people not to worry about that. Jerry, don't worry about nuclear war tonight. Okay. I mean, nuclear war is different from Putin deciding to pop a little bomb on Ukraine or Iran and Israel going at it. But global nuclear apocalyptic conflagration of the sort that was possible and many people thought likely in the 1960s, around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, long answer.
No,
Question.
beautiful. I'm all for anecdotes, long answers, stories. Frank Zappa said, we're not going to have nuclear war because there's too much real estate involved. But that was a few years ago. And now it's like, well, these guys are just going to jump off and go to another planet. So
yeah, that's it. Yeah. I mean, among Frank Zappa's many marvelous quotes, I'm going to steal that and put it in my book.
That's a great, I got a million of them, but that I learned from him. But I got that question, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night, from Earl Morris, is asking Rumsfeld. His Rumsfeld doc is like watching McLuhan talk for 90 minutes. It's like,
it's
whoa,
amazing.
It is amazing. And
I went to an event at Berkeley with Errol and Rumsfeld being interviewed by Mark Danner, writer. And Rumsfeld was there. Not Rumsfeld, I'm sorry, McNamara.
Yeah.
McNamara was on stage. Different film, different apocalyptic film by Errol Morris.
Fog of War, you mean? Fog of War.
Yeah. McNamara was on stage, and he came on stage with his briefcase. And we all kept wondering, what's in that briefcase? We never found out. But at exactly 9 o'clock straight up, when the session was scheduled to end, McNamara reached down and grabbed his briefcase and started to get up. He was still the boss. He was in charge of the schedule and the agenda here.
Well, it's amazing. I want to ask you a question about that, and probably now would be a good time because, for years I wanted to ask Errol at some public screening or in a setting his feelings about humanizing a war criminal.
Mhm.
Now, uh, my wife's dad worked with Cesar Chavez and Ralph Nader, and he says humanizing anyone is good. But I I just had this bias, like, dude, you're giving this guy this platform so that we can treat him like a human and forgive him. Well, that's good. We should. But accountability, all that, like, well, when McNamara died, it says war hero. It doesn't say war criminal on his obituary. So, I mean, since you know Earl, how would you ask that question about humanizing McNamara? Is there a question there? Or it's like, it's sort of I have too much of a bias that it's not a good question. We've tried to suss it out. Like, how exactly could you ask that? And he's probably been attacked so many times. It's like, won't go there or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's the standard critics, check that
Yeah.
box when you're talking about Errol. I would never presume to speak for Errol Morris, who speaks, the most unique voice one can imagine. Hang on one second.
Yeah. There's Earl right now. he wants to that's funny, God. But I'm not saying for him for you to speak him.
Yeah, I have thought about that though. And first of all, I tend to agree that there's no harm in humanizing anyone. And the reason is that could be me.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've made 2 films about Robert Oppenheimer, and we ran into some of the same issues.
Yeah.
And from the very, very beginning, I did this film called The Day After Trinity, and the very first line in The Day After Trinity is from the physicist Hans Bethe. And Bethe says, "You may well ask how people with kind hearts and humanist feelings can go work on weapons of mass destruction."
Yeah.
And that to me meant that I would have been on the next train to Los Alamos to make that bomb that ended up in the end, that it was an enterprise like so many enterprises that got away from its creator. Starting with, you got, I don't know who you have, Prometheus and Faust and everybody. And if you're going to make films about people who do things that you would rather not have done, I think it's important to understand that you might have done them, given the right set of circumstances. In Oppenheimer's case, the wires that crossed were, the rise of this demonic fascist in Europe that was killing, Jews all over Europe. It was, hell bent on dominating the world. And that wire crossed with the greatest physics experiment in history. And would I have joined in? Sure. And then the question becomes, at what point, as it does with McNamara, the question becomes, well, at what point is enough enough? At what point do I have to break my silence? At what point do I walk away from Los Alamos? How much does it take for me to stop bombing civilians? And that's when the questions become much more interesting. And that's what's interesting with McNamara. I mean, it's not the fact that he became Secretary of Defense or that he was involved with the war in Vietnam. We've had plenty of secretaries of defense and plenty of wars. It's the moment when he crossed over into knowing that all was lost and he kept his mouth shut. That's what's interesting in that film. If I was Errol, I mean, I can't, I wish he had asked the question.
I figure eventually I'll be able to ask him, but I want to ask him things that aren't attack dog questions. I want it to be open-ended so that he can, it's just a prompt. It's like this one. Let's go to this one, because that's McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, John, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I mean, Pound is an interesting choice for that
question. You realize I often leave it out and I say a poet said, but then, once you say the sources on him, like this guy from the Wall Street Journal I interviewed, he goes, I wouldn't believe anything Pound said. I thought, oh no, I shouldn't have said Pound said it, but go ahead.
Our favorite fascist poet. I actually wrote my undergraduate thesis on Ezra Pound.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Well, I think there's some truth in that. I think it's self-serving. I think that artists, including me and Ezra Pound, we all think we have more influence than we do. I think, in fact, documentary films do have, sometimes a profound influence on policy and a profound influence on rethinking things. That's another topic we might want to go into.
Oh yeah, we're good, but that's upcoming, definitely.
Pound, antenna is actually a good phrase.
Yeah.
What is the antenna hooked up to? I mean, who's listening?
That's Cindy Sheehan. Let me interrupt for a second. That's Cindy Sheehan when she, did her anti-war protest in front of Bush's front yard. She goes, we're only talking to the choir, and there ain't even a choir.
Yeah.
I mean, that's discouraging, but it is like there's a lot going on in this question, because it's like, well, if the artists are self-serving, but you have good intentions, you want to inform people. Day your Trinity film was, immense when the big Nolan film came out, because people were like, whoa, well, this thing has already been tackled a lot better, or, it's been tackled well in, putting on YouTube free, or that was like unbelievable. Now we have access. But then the user, the viewer, the consumer, and I don't want to sound elitist. Oh, well, they don't get that there's more being said here. There's like, how do you read between the lines? Like there's a little deeper message. So they ignore it and they just go, oh, that's entertainment.
Yeah. Do the deplorables understand our high cinematic art, right?
Yeah, well, let me add one more thing. I'd love to tell you this. I had a lecture that I should have gave it at your class. How Sheila Nevins hijacked how Sheila Nevins in PBS hijacked the revolution. Because I mean, it's not a diss on Sheila or PBS. It's that all the young white privileged yuppies saw the Weather Underground and go, that's great, and then they don't do anything. So it just alleviates them of this need to feel like they're being on top of it, and then they don't do anything.
I could not agree more. If I have to go to one more damn party where people sit around and talk about politics and don't do anything, just for the record, I do voter registration every election cycle. I go out with my clipboard and
beautiful.
Well, okay. Now there were 9 questions.
Yeah. Well, basically is why do we, and I say we, because we are consumers and producers. Why do humans in general ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though the artists are broadcasting them?
Yeah. I think, I can't say why people ignore the hidden psychic effects. I mean, people have become very good through evolution at hiding psychic effects. I mean, otherwise we'd all be crazy. In terms of art, and I would include documentary film in art, although I think of it as much as journalism as art. And those are the two forces that I think I've tried to, there's a reason that I taught in a journalism school and not in a film school. I think there's a long game here. And if we're talking about the, forces that artists can articulate, or for which they can be the antenna, as Pound said, there's a long game. And it's very interesting to look at documentary films and feature films for that many that have some political or societal point, the elimination of nuclear weapons, um, you know, poverty in Flint, Michigan. And if you look over the years since those films were made, I mean, The Day After Trinity, for instance, has been purchased. The first print of The Day After Trinity was purchased by the CIA.
Oh,
My amazement.
wow.
Yeah, and I actually gave the purchase order to Frank Oppenheimer, Robert's brother. The Army bought it. The national headquarters of the Quakers bought it. Tons of school districts bought it. The Navy bought it. The Joint Chiefs of Staff Library bought it. The Unitarians bought it. And recently, I just found out if you go to work in the archives department at Los Alamos Laboratory, which is huge, it's where they store all the data from all the nuclear tests ever. If you go to work there, it's required viewing to watch The Day After Trinity.
Oh my! That was 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter prints.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a fossil now. It's just a really old-fashioned, clunky old movie. But
when they were buying it, were they buying 16 and 35 or just 16?
Oh no! Now it's all digital.
I mean
back then they were buying 16 millimeter prints from films for, I don't know, $200 a piece or something like that.
200. Wow, that's not bad. Yeah. But that's also, John, again, I'm sorry to interrupt. That's when they asked Gilo, what does your film Battle of Algiers do? He said, it teaches people how to make a film. Now, that's the exact thing that you said. I'm going to add that to my repertoire of wording, because the Black Panthers and Irish movements used Battle of Algiers as a training film, and so did Bush and his cronies. So that just shows you that's sort of like the master doc, that it's not telling you how to think. It's like, here it is, think for yourself.
Yeah, the Pentagon's anti-insurgency initiatives during the war in Iraq used the Battle of Algiers. They sat the officers down and made them watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's also a great textbook.
Yeah, pretty good for a film that has no actors except one actor.
Yeah, the Colonel.
And it is called a fiction film.
Yeah.
It's not a fiction. It's a documentary in a lot of ways, but I guess it is a fiction film.
No, not by my definition.
You call it, what do you call it? Nonfiction?
I call it, the most brilliant truth-based fiction film ever made.
Most true. That's great.
Yeah, here's the deal.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
People have been trying for decades, almost 100 years now, to define documentary. And I think it's kind of wonderful that we have not defined it. It's not straitjacketed. It's, it's a living, evolving form. The thing that I've found is really serviceable over all these years of filmmaking is that when in a documentary, when the lights come on, what the audience believes to be true should be true, as it is in the Battle of Algiers. And what the audience believes to be real should be real. And not in the Battle of Algiers. The audience knows that's not real. And when I used to teach the Battle of Algiers in class, I showed it side by side with French newsreels from the Battle of Algiers. And French newsreels passed the else test of what's real is real and what's true is true. Although we can debate the truth in the great sense of either film. The French news cameras obviously had their idea of truth. But what that way of looking at documentary allows is it allows Errol Morris with his reenactments, because the audience knows what's real. It allows a genius like Lourdes Portillo to her surreal reenactments. It allows animation. It allows all kinds of broadening of the palette. It allows all sorts of stylistic anarchy, as long as the audience knows what they're getting.
Yeah.
And the problem arose over the last 10 or 15 years when it became so easy to fake archive footage and not let the audience know. There's that famous case of the Oscar that went to a film called Mighty Times about the civil rights movement in Birmingham in 1963, which used newly manufactured archive footage without flagging it for the audience. And there's, people, you can get accused of being a prude and, it's only a movie. And well, I never believe that it's only a movie. I believe it. These movies drive how people make decisions. They drive voters. They drive policy. They drive,
That's really deep, because it's perfect lead in, John. Do artists have moral obligation?
Yeah, I think they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, artists' moral obligations as individual human beings are different from their moral obligations as makers of cultural stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, Richard Wagner was one of the most disgusting people in the history of art, and he made unbelievable art.
Yeah.
And again and again and again throughout history of the arts, you'll find terrible people who made great art.
Yeah. And then that's the dilemma of separating the art from the artist. Can you do that?
Yeah. And what's her name? Who was it? Was it Camille? Who wrote there's a very good book recently about, among other things, Woody Allen and Roman Polanski. And I think, why would you make art that's, well, there's plenty of immoral art. We can start with Triumph of the Will, Leni Riefenstahl's film about Hitler. But why would you make a film that you believe is immoral?
Yeah.
Leni Riefenstahl believed that her film was perfectly moral. And she spoke about that in later years.
Yeah.
Clockwork Orange got savaged as an immoral film for its depravity. There's plenty of examples.
Well, let me ask you on Clockwork. This is a question I've asked him. In fact, I asked this to James Harris, who worked on 8 films with Kubrick. Mm-hmm. Stanley was strong-armed to pull Clockwork from UK screens only for 30 years. They told him, look, your film's causing hoodlums to beat up winos.
Yeah.
Now, the question's sort of not worded perfect, but did Stanley do that because he believed his film was causing hoodlums to beat up wino, or did he do it as a publicity stunt? Because you could go anywhere else. You could go to London and buy a bootleg VHS. Why only in the UK? So, any thoughts?
I do know that Night and Fog was not shown in France until 30 years after it was made.
But did he pull Night and Fog because he was forced by the uppers? The uppers said, this is Stanley. He was
was he himself?
It was him. So I
can't answer
think he did it because he knows it didn't cause it. Now James Harris, who knew Stanley, I didn't know Stanley, says no, Stanley was 2 things: family and film. He thought they were going to come and beat up his kids. So I don't know what it is. And if Stanley was here and we could ask him, it doesn't mean that's the most true answer. We would want him to be truthful, but
that's interesting. I thought you meant it got pulled the way, violent comic books got pulled here in the 1950s.
My information, according to various Kubrick sources, he was strong-armed is the words they use.
Okay.
They strong-armed Kubrick to say, I'm pulling it from UK screens.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, it is a controversy. I mean, I remember the day my mom came to here from Flint, Michigan. That's where I was born. She says, "Jerry, I want to watch Clockwork Orange." I go, "You don't want to watch that. It's horrible." I mean, come on. And I mean, we sat here and watched it on VHS. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, all the power to my mom, but it was like, Jesus.
That's like a Saturday Night Live sketch, watching Clockwork Orange with your mom.
Oh, and there's another line. These two kind of gang kids were in the Venice Public Library, and my friend heard them, and they go, "I saw this film last night, and it was so violent. It was Clockwork Orange." It's like, no, well, you're sort of drenched in the violent milieu. Why are you complaining about a film being too violent? So, anyways, this is Louis Buñuel saying, because you're bringing up truth, moral obligation. Louis says, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it."
Well, yeah, I mean, people get undergraduate degrees in that question. And
that is a great answer, John. Well, suss it out. What's your feelings on that?
Well, my feelings start with, I part ways with the structuralist and all those guys. I mean, something actually happened. Out on that road in Texas, in Errol's line, something actually happened. A police officer was actually killed by a young, whatever his name was, Harris, I believe.
Yeah.
And I have no patience with folks who talk about film or journalism or history or any form of discourse as, the truth is relative. I mean, there's no question that people's perceptions of the truth is relative. Israelis and Palestinians' perceptions of the Nakba are different, but those events actually happened.
Yeah.
And what keeps us going as what we now call content creators, is the endless churning of trying to get closer and closer and closer to an exposition of what actually happened. Yeah. Now, in documentary, I mean, our only claim really is that we have more literal connection to events in the real world than other forms. I mean, the linguists and those guys call it an indexical connection.
How do you spell? You mean the word is index, END?
Indexical, yeah. I mean, I hate theory, but this is a useful term.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, yeah.
It means that there's a physical, the light. There is light actually reflecting off your face at this moment.
Yeah,
and it's coming through this tangle of servers and wires, and it's illuminating a screen. But there's a physical connection, and that's to the real Jerry. Yeah. I'll give you an example that's not from film, but I was driving to location one morning many, many years ago along a road in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And I came around a corner, and flattened on the road were two animals. Yeah. The animal in front was a flattened deer, and the animal behind was a flattened mountain lion.
Yeah.
Okay. And that, in a funny sort of way, is very similar to a documentary, because here was the physical evidence of a story. The mountain lion had been chasing the deer. They both ran onto the highway. They got pasted by a semi or whatever pasted them. So, I mean, not to get too far into the weeds, but it's, what we do as nonfiction makers, nonfiction filmmakers, it's like cave painting. Yeah. It's the difference between, a person in a cave holding up their hand and dusting dust on it so that the physical mark of their hand on the cave bears a physical relationship to the real thing. And that's different from Albrecht Dürer holding up his hand and doing a marvelous drawing of his hand. Anyhow, blah, blah. I'm getting way down in the weeds. This is the kind of stuff that drives me crazy when I'd get film students that would come from these fancy colleges and all they had ever thought about was this kind of stuff. And then when it came time to actually make a movie, you had to beat it all out of them.
Beat it out of them. That was good. But, you know, it's great that you reacted to Louis that way, because 80 to 90% of people, I've been saying that quote for many years. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. They go, ah, that's great. And then one guy finally says, no, that's bullshit, because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. Now, Louis being a little satirical, but I morphed it into, if the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to name or seek a destination?
Well, I'll go back to David Webb Peoples, my mentor.
Yeah.
Author, the screenwriter for Blade Runner. And he spent many years laboring as an editor, a low-paid editor, actually in the same basement in Berkeley, where Errol Morris was making his first film about pet cemeteries.
Yeah.
David sat there, and these film crews would go out in the field, and they'd go to, you know, Hawaii and Kazakhstan, and they'd have dinner with the princess, and they'd risk their lives. They'd get to see the volcano, and they would eat in fine restaurants, and they'd come back and they would give him the footage. And he said what they would do is and the footage was shit, but they would confuse a good time with a good film, right? That is, they would confuse their experience of gathering this material with what was actually on the film. And what was actually on the film, and I've done it myself, you know, if there are shots that I got and I did it at great personal risk, physical risk.
Wow.
I would think, wow, that is a killer shot. You know, and it turns out it's just a shot of some guys, you know, some armored personnel carrier sitting there. But I don't know. What was the question?
Well, no, that was good. It was like, why do we have to name a destination if the journey is more important? Yeah.
So these guys were confusing the journey.
Yeah.
And they thought they had gotten to the destination. Well, you know, I mean, there's no harm in having fun on the journey. I'm all for it. I think it's great, you know. And why are you going on the journey? If you're going on the journey in order to have your retirement cruise or your nasty post-divorce cruise for your own benefit, that's one thing. If you're going on the journey to document, you know, genocide in Myanmar, that's another thing. And there's nothing that says, there's no contradiction between having a decent time on the journey or even a good time on the journey and coming back with the goods or not coming back.
That is also like people in Paris in the 20s were flaneurs or psychogeography. They would wander aimlessly or just drink coffee at a coffee spot, and they changed the world. Like Joyce said, he had epiphany and everydayness. So, you know, everybody answers that, John. Oh, because we got to have a destination name because we got to have a focus.
Okay.
And it's like, you know, you're not going to just go outside and start making a documentary about nothing, and then something's going to pop up and you're going to smell the twig on your walk in the woods and then make it does happen, but there's some sense that humans think. So this is let's just go into truth, because we brought up this truth and honesty thing. This is Shelby Foote. A fact is not a truth until you love it. What do you think of that?
Let me just back up for a minute.
Okay, please go ahead.
Well, you brought up, you know, flaneur, and if we're going to use fancy, I love that word.
Yeah.
The closest thing we have to a flaneur in documentary is Fred Wiseman.
There you go. Beautiful.
You know, when he approaches a situation or a subject, he says, this will be a report on what I discovered.
Yeah.
I mean, God bless Fred.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got the best deal in town, and he's one of the few people who has the nerve and the perseverance and the funding to actually do that,
Yeah.
and the genius, frankly. Now, Shelby Foote, that's
Well,
an
let me react to Fred for a second,
yeah.
because I wanted to ask Fred all these questions. I would love to do this. And he won't do this kind of thing. And at USC, I saw him, all the hotshot documentary filmmaking teachers, like of your peer group, were there trying to get him to say something, and he just sits there and goes, nah, no. And he's really good at it. I don't know how many times you say it. There is a lot of interviews where he reveals it. But, he basically says, I'm just trying to tell a good story. Where'd you get that from? Reading Henry James. Well, what's your motive? Charlie Chaplin. He just like nails. He says, I'm a New England Jewish guy, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, he condensed our whole 90 minutes into like 3 minutes. It's on somebody's cell phone. I wish I could get it. But he calls his stuff reality fiction.
Yes,
That's what Fred calls it. And it is. I've never thought of him being a flaneur. So I appreciated you bringing that up.
Well, he chooses his boulevard very carefully.
Yeah.
He's not wandering around Paris. He's wandering along, Central Peace or somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
does have a sense, but now, sorry to interject that. I just want to say, but now, because I do find what we're doing here is you're teaching me a lot. You're very articulate and you're having fun. I mean, that's what I like to do, is have fun with this so that we can go off on tangents and not feel like, so this was the Shelby Foote, because a fact is not a truth until you love it.
I think that's bullshit.
Yeah. See, now a lot of people, how is that?
What does he mean? Why does that make it? Doesn't that poison it?
Yeah.
I mean, Shelby Foote's, I'm no historian. He is a historian. He's, one of the great storytellers, but I don't understand that. I don't know what that, I think it's a clever bon mot, so don't tell Shelby I said that.
But. Oh, no, that's all right. Because it's like, some of these, I set up these quotes before the question, and I tell people, you don't have to apply the quote, but some of these I have a page of truth quotes, and I want to read you one more by Eartha Kitt.
Who is it?
Eartha Kitt. Truth is a theory that is constantly being disproved. Only lies, it seems, go on forever.
Well, I mean, Eartha Kitt is a pretty good philosopher, in my experience. I don't think I buy that. Only lies go on for, I think
the key is that she says only lies, it seems, go on forever.
Oh, it seems, okay.
Yeah, so it is funny. There is a little twist there, but but that's like back to the Hitler thing. If you say a lie long enough, it people will believe it.
Oh yeah, no, that's true. No. Yeah, Mark Danner has written very eloquently about this. That if you, during the Iraq War, if you repeat that bullshit long enough, people believe it.
Yeah,
and I mean that problem is certainly now compounded with the internet. If you had a choice of a world with the internet or without the internet, which would you choose? There's no middle ground. You have to choose one or the other. Which would you choose?
Well, that's a great question. It's easy. I would choose not with the internet, but I'm a Luddite. I don't even have a cell phone, but I live in a cell phone world and I live in an internet world. And, before I would have to wait to go to Berkeley or you come to LA to do these. So I do 4 interviews a week now, and I've been able to do these like way cool because we're basically, John, doing live TV.
Yeah.
We're not in New York with big clunky cameras. This is live TV. It's a phenomenon. But yeah, no, I'm more like everything ends in the book. The printed matter is the, and I'm a documentary freak too. But it's hard. It's hard to answer those without all these ifs and buts after, because how would I have found out about you so easily without the internet? I could go to your Berkeley page and I go, there's his email, and I sent it. I mean, that was like, before it was like, oh, I have to have some connect to him, and then they got to convince that this is worthy. So in the big picture, I would say no. What would your answer be? Yes or no?
I would have answered your postcard.
That's you know Robert Nelson, the filmmaker in San Francisco.
Yeah, the great Blondino.
He was dying, and I wanted to interview him, and I sent him a postcard because he doesn't do email or phone, and he says, I'll do it. And I sent him the questions on a piece of paper, and he handwrit his answers on a lot of these questions I'm asking you. And to me, it's one of my favorite of all time because you see his handwriting.
Wow.
You know.
Wow. Yeah, so, no, I grew up on those guys.
But well,
I mean, Studs Terkel did okay without the internet, doing very similar to what you do.
Studs is a master, but he worked with tape, and he did work with electricity. The bottom line is
electricity. No, I know. I want to keep electricity. No, don't take the electricity, and don't take the phone. Don't take the paper and the pencil. Don't take the computers. Fine. I think that, I don't know. I fortunately, I don't think I'm ever going to have to make that choice.
Yeah.
Unless we do, in fact, get we have our nuclear Armageddon. I don't know. I really don't know. I think there's a lot to be said for both ways. And the main thing to be said for, putting the internet out of its misery. Well, two things. Obviously, the ease with which misinformation gets spread. That's commonplace knowledge now. The other is the deliberative pace of what we do has changed. I mean, Walter Murch loved rewinding film because it was time to think. It was time to look at stuff backwards, which we never do now. I mean, even typing scripts. I used to write a lot of narration. I love narration. I'm the last filmmaker on earth who loves narration, this fascist practice of the voice of God. I love it. Back in the day when it was so hard to spit out a flawless page from the typewriter, you really had to think about what you were going to say before you wrote it down. And that may not matter in a letter to mom or an email to your daughter, but it matters if you're writing narration, which is very, very precise. It's sort of like writing sonnets.
Yeah.
There's so much bad narration out there because anyhow, don't get me started.
No, it's really good, John, what you said, because it's really McLuhan saying, he said, understanding is not having a point of view. Now, he had points of views, he had biases, but he's saying in the big picture, if you can have suspended judgment and study the patterns, get comprehensive awareness, the big picture, then you can say how the internet has services and how it has disservices, and suss out how you can flip the disservices into services. So it really leads into this question: are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I don't. One cannot generalize. There are plenty of good and bad old ideas, and there are plenty of good and bad new ideas.
Yeah.
I think as we age, we have less. We're less inviting. We find new ideas less inviting. Just simply because of the effort involved and because we're set in our ways. And Winston Churchill say the young man who is not a socialist has no heart, and the old man who is a socialist has no brain.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, that's a little bit I mean, am I more comfortable digging out my Ezra Pound and reading some old, elliptical Ezra Pound than trying to follow the latest poets in the literary digest from London? I'm going to go, retreat to the Ezra Pound.
That is good, because Churchill had a big effect on McLuhan. He said, we shape our buildings, then they shape us.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
what Marshall was about is saying, well, yeah, all these aphorisms and maxims are smart, but what's more important is how you reword it.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, we shape our tools, then they shape us.
Yeah.
So that he just took a little step further. But John, I asked for 90 minutes. It's 90 minutes. I'd love to do a part 2 somewhere down the line, like 2 or 3 months, because I'm booked up. But can you go a little longer right now, or do you got to get going?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is interesting. I like this format where we're not playing against the clock, and
yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Oh, my earliest memory ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not pleasant. I was drowning a cat.
In what city or what part? Where?
It was in Greenwich Village on Jane Street. I was about 2 years old, and we were living in a little apartment. My dad was a painter. There was a place called the Jane Street Gallery, and we lived behind the gallery. As it happened, the parents of my wife-to-be shared the same gallery, and I met my wife when I was about that age. But we had a kitten, and I had no idea what, I was a little kid, and I remember holding this kitten underwater and the little bubbles coming up. And fortunately, my mother showed up, and saved the cat. And I have ever since then been just wonderfully kind to all cats.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Profession was you're holding people underwater to see how important these movies are, and you guys better pay attention, because it's going to save your ass. And then my mom's going to save you. Don't worry.
You won't waiting. Yeah, right. Yeah. I do remember my very, very first memory of a movie. This is an interesting question for people. Ask your friends, what's your very first memory of a film? And you get very interesting, surprising answers. Mine, I was about 5 years old. It was the first film I ever went to. And in those days, you had to go into a theater.
Yeah.
I went to a Bob Hope movie.
Oh, yeah.
My father. And it was a comedy. And in the comedy, Bob Hope fell in the ocean off of a ship, and he was being attacked by a shark. And I literally had to leave. I had to go out into the lobby because I was so terrified by this. And my dad came running out, and he explained to me that it's not real. It's not a real shark. The guy is pretending. It's all pretend. And maybe that's why I got into documentary.
That's heavy. But then did you believe him and go back in?
Yeah, I did. I believed him. Yeah. I don't know if I went back. I think it was the ultimate, or the final scene in the movie. Yeah. So I may have been too late to go back in. But yeah, it was a black and white movie, and I've tried to, track down what the scene was since, and I haven't found it. But I know my dad explained. Sometimes when you have these memories, these childhood memories, it's good to check with your parents. And I checked with him later on. Did I run out of the Bob Hope movie? I also had to check with him.
Yeah, it's really good, because I have surveyed movie audiences. Tell me your first movie experience, and in what format. Drive, movie theater, VHS, cell phone. Yeah. And so mine was in Flint, Michigan, at the Capitol Theater, which is still there, one of these great old movie palaces. My mom took me to see Bambi, and I fell asleep. And it was like, that's the beauty, because I'm like into Salvador Dali, who said watch films with your eyes shut, and especially Harry Smith, who said he learned from Bruno, the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep. And then you dream a collective dream. You know, you're all dreaming.
Yeah.
But do you think memory is more a curse or more a blessing?
No, it depends on what your memories are.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a Holocaust survivor, barely by the skin of your teeth, memory may not be good for you as you go through your daily life. If you've, you know, lived the, the prosperous and happy life that I have, yeah,
Yeah.
memory's not a problem. I think collective memory is more complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume you're talking about personal. Well, what do you think about that? I'm a little.
Well, it's funny because again, 80% of people go, well, it's a blessing. But some people will just go, nope, it's a curse.
Yeah.
So you wonder what context they're putting it in, because they might have memories they don't want to remember, or they know. My philosophy is at the end of your life, we go back into childhoodness. Where it's child innocent and we forget stuff.
Yeah.
And I spent the last or 8 days with my dad, and he had dementia and Alzheimer's or whatever. And it was the best 8 days of my life. I'd go, Dad, you want to go to lunch? You go, yeah. He says, you want to take a nap? You go, yeah. I says, okay, you want to go to bed now? You go, yeah. I says, man, we live a similar lifestyle here. And it was innocent, but we've demonized Alzheimer's in dementia. And I think, well, I guess we should, or we got to think of it as a sickness, but maybe it's just like, hey, you don't have to worry about paying bills and all that crap anymore.
Yeah,
So,
my mother could not remember why she'd been angry all those years.
yeah,
Alzheimer's was very liberating for her.
it's a liberating thing. So I think it is a stupid, here's what one of my favorite answers was ever. Is it more a curse or more a blessing? This woman said, the word more doesn't function in your question.
Oh.
See, she knew of course it's both, and it depends. My question is just a prompt to get you. I always say you don't have to answer the question.
Right.
So tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, within my immediate family, it was actually a constellation of people, and it was my parents and my wife's parents. And I knew my parents from the moment I was born. I knew my wife's parents from the moment I was about a year and a half old.
That is amazing.
And I grew up with.
So yeah, how do you break it down? Those four. What did you get from your mom, your dad, her mom, and her dad?
Yeah,
Just
they were all artists.
Yeah.
They made their living. They were all extremely decent, honest people, just sort of the basics, check that decency, honesty box. They all spent a lot of time trying to leave a better world for us than they had been born into. And I think we did. I'm not so sure that we're leaving a better world for our kids, but that's a conversation. And then the one outside the family was Henry Hampton, who was a African-American film producer who did Eyes on the Prize, whom I didn't get to meet till I was in my 30s. Who was, I learned more from Henry than from any other person in the documentary business. And I've known a lot of people in the documentary business.
It's beautiful.
Actually.
Yeah, I know you do. And that's the beauty. You can really survey. I mean, I love to when I go to the Ann Arbor Film Festival, I like to ask these people, like, 5 documentary filmmakers. What do you think of this one, this one, this one? And just give me a like thumbs up, thumbs down. And it's so fun because someday we'll talk about it, but it's really wild how people have, you know, their biases from just watching the film and then knowing the filmmaker, you know.
First festival I was ever in was the Ann Arbor Festival, by the way.
Really? What was the title?
The title was, I think it was You Don't Die Here. I think it was my thesis film from film school. I know James Broughton was on the jury.
Oh, that's a famous festival.
Yeah. Oh, yes, great festival. Oh, that was your festival?
That particular issue is famous because, anyways, yeah, that's Pauline Kael's husband, right?
Yes, very good for a while. Yeah.
Wow, that's heavy. You played Ann Arbor. That's really cool. Okay, so did your parents raise you a particular religion?
We were Unitarians. And you know, I found it kind of lacking, actually. I kind of, you know, in later years sort of thought, you know, it would have been better to be Catholic, you know, to be something that had, you know, the Unitarian Church doesn't have a lot of mojo.
That is good. Better to be Catholic. You know that McLuhan converted to Catholicism?
Yeah, doesn't surprise me a lot. Yeah, really. No, I did not know that.
That's funny. Better to be Catholic. I love that. But do you pray?
Say what? No, I'm Unitarians. We don't pray.
But are you still practicing, or did you check out?
No, I still have incredible respect for the Unitarians, mainly because they were just way out ahead of the crowd in terms of the mainstream religions when it came to social justice and stopping the war in Vietnam and arms control. I mean, they got it nailed.
Yeah.
I just found the services, you know, I wanted a little bit of mystery, and I wanted better singing, and I wanted less interpretive dance. And, you know, it just seemed more like going to church. By the time I got in high school, it was a little bit like going to a lecture on cultural anthropology. And I could have used something like, you know, Judaism or Catholicism or Mormonism that had like mojo, you know.
I love that word, mojo. My friend had an amazing art.
We're Southern Baptists, actually.
Yeah, Southern Baptist
Church in the South. Yeah.
My friend had this amazing art gallery in Venice. We did events there. It's where the Beats were born. It was the Venice West, and then we were there as Sponto Gallery. And then Sponto died, and all the stuff was in the gallery. And the guy who played the African dude who played the drums out on the boardwalk went in there, and the cops have it all sealed. And he says, I'm here to pick up my drum. He says, no, you can't take anything. He says, he looked, the black drummer looks at the black detective or whatever government guy, and he goes, dude, if you don't let me take my drums, I'm going to put some mojo on your ass. And the guy goes, okay, take it. And I just love the word, like, I'm going to put some mojo on. Okay, so if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Oh, God. Oh, God. Well done.
That's it. But I like the first part. Oh, God. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Well, I mean, I think evil people exist. Well, let me phrase that differently. You know, I think all babies are born innocent.
Yeah.
People do evil things, no question about that.
That's it. But a lot of times people say we're all capable of evil. That's what we sort of touched on earlier. Are we all capable of fill in the blank? I mean, what?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think, you know, again, channeling Dave Peoples, you know, he was the first person to point out to me that the SS officer did not get up in the morning determined to do evil.
Yeah.
He thought he knew that what he was doing was right. And he didn't just think he knew what he was doing was right. He knew that what he was doing was right. Um, so maybe, maybe that evil is a societal construct. I don't know. I think there's some things. Well, I don't know. You're sort of calling the question on a lot of deep things here that I haven't really thought about. There's fundamental evil in the Bible, obviously.
Yeah.
Does that make it fundamentally evil? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
why don't we do a couple more and then we'll out of here, because you've really contributed a lot, and I hope we can.
I'd love to do a second one.
Yeah, we'll do a second one, because I really want to get into filmmaking, and we've touched on it, but some specific. But this is like the hidden question to the evil question. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, yeah, that's a good one. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, John, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience with enemies. I've been fortunate in that in my life. Watts is often right, and I think he's probably right in this case. But what's the alternative? Do you not acknowledge your enemy?
Well, I get that often. I says, if you don't acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Mm-hmm. So it's a funny twist on, well, what does acknowledging mean? Like, Walt Whitman says, I no doubt deserve my enemies, and like Fellini saying, I need an enemy. Well, like, is that a social construct? Again, what you said so brilliantly, because I had a skateboard philosopher tell me this. When I asked him this question, he said, it's like this. Enemy.
Enemy.
That once you name them, then you got an enemy. But if you don't name them, but that seems like kind of that doesn't work either, because we have to be aware that we're being screwed, or
it works to the extent that if you if you got a problem, particularly if you got a problem with another person or group of people, and you can actually identify the problem, that's the first step to maybe solving the problem. And I also understand Fellini needing an enemy, and I presume Fellini had plenty of enemies. There are plenty of folks who need, evidently, adversity in order to get them fired up, to make them run faster, to make them, push the crew until they vomit. And, they need an adversary.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have had more of that. Maybe I should have been, more driven by adversity to be more aggressive in my filmmaking. Maybe I would have made more movies that way, better movies.
Well, I don't know about that, because is conflict the human condition? What is humankind's most productive state?
Well, it may be that it's at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
It may be that the most productive folks in some ways are the people at the bottom rung of the ladder with their backs against the wall, as Howard Thurman said, the people who are suffering the most and have no choice but to be creative and productive and claw their way toward their very existence. And then at the other end are people like us who have the luxury
Yeah.
of the time and the resources and the full belly and the good cup of coffee to sit and to be the new Ezra Pound or to be the new Fellini.
Yeah, that's reminds me of Berkeley in the 60s, one of my favorite documentaries.
Mark
And
Kitcher.
you know, I found this statistic once. I don't know if it's true, but it's like rich kids start revolutions because they have time to read what's going on, and then they tell the poor people, "You're being screwed," and they're like, "Well, we're too busy working." Okay, but gather around and do the revolution, and then it's sort of flipped in Berkeley in the 60s. The Black Panthers said, well, we heard Mao's Little Red Book was really good. So we went down to Chinatown and bought them for a nickel, and then we sold them to all the hippies for $5 or something, And then the punchline is, and then I read it. It's a good book.
Is that Huey Newton says that, or
It was probably Huey. It was probably one of them, but it was just like so good because the punchline was so important. And then I read it,
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think that, I get, having been in my younger years, a white activist.
Yeah.
And, been in the South and gone to jail and did a bunch of anti-Vietnam stuff. I do get these days a little impatient with activists activists of privilege who have not experienced, anyhow, I'm going to dig my
No,
own.
but I know you're saying. You don't have to worry. It's important that we express our biases. In fact, that's what this series is all about. I want people to feel that they can say what they want, and it's not like there's this watch guard saying, "Oh my God," This goes up on YouTube as soon as we're done, and anybody can watch it. And so what? It's like people trying to, like what I've always heard is two people talking is the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you get people to sign up to vote. I was a poll cat for 15 years, and my neighbors wouldn't look at me walking down the street. But when I was behind a desk signing them up to vote, they'd go, "Oh, I know you. You live in my neighborhood." So it was an amazing thing that we go, and then people go, if God wanted us to vote, he would have created candidates. And then it's like the people, this line, they go, if you vote, you're only encouraging them.
Yeah.
It's like, no, psychologically, I think voting is important.
Well, I take no prisoners on that. I mean, elections have consequences.
Yeah.
And we, unfortunately, we don't make the rules, you and I, when it comes to the electoral system, and all we can do is vote, and it's critical.
Yeah.
And it has enormous consequences. So that's why I do it. I started out doing it 50 years ago in Mississippi and haven't stopped since.
That's really cool. Jon, let's close out with this one because I do want to get into films, especially documentaries, and voting not voting, in politics. And you brought up just what you just said a second ago is one of my most important questions. But here's the question I thought we could end with because it does entail film. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago.
Really?
He basically, Volta Cinema. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Mm-hmm. Years later, Faulkner says, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, because we're not Henry VIII, and because we weren't around for Henry VIII, and because we weren't around for the police dogs in Birmingham, Alabama, and we weren't inside Algiers during the Battle of Algiers. Yeah. I mean, it just, I didn't know that about Joyce. I know that Pound dismissed cinema. He said it's the mere mimesis of kinesis. He said it was
Did he really? I need that line. Wow.
just the imitation of motion.
Yeah.
But your question again has about 9 elements built into it.
Yeah.
Why do we have to do it? Yeah, I mean, I think, well, the theater, going into a movie theater is very different from a kid who's 8 hours on their cell phone all day long.
Yeah.
I think that's, that's just wrong.
Well, let's go into that for a second, because this is TSA, tactile situation awareness. When the bomber pilot is getting bombed, they look at all these gauges and they have to make split-second decisions, because they're probably going to die, but they could do something to not die. So what my friend said is that's what kids are now. They're TSA, tactile situation awareness. They have so many things going that they don't identify with one like we did. We grew up identifying with one, a phone or a TV or a car, and then they get the bigger picture. So what do kids do all day? They type. I mean, they're basically texting. So 8 hours of typing, how bad could that be? But I know what you're saying, because it has services and disservices.
Yeah. I shouldn't have said it's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a philosophical generalization that I will retract. I think that,
but it is important for you to say it, because that's what we are. We've lived longer, and we're saying, look at what you're doing. Are you aware that you're doing this, kids? Because you said at the beginning, John, I want to go walk on the path in back of my house, and I want to cut wood, and I want to have direct experience.
Yeah, but I'm not them. And if they can join me out in the woods, or join me with their friends down the block, or join their friends down the block, I think that's preferable to 8 hours a day on the phone, obviously. But I don't think it's an all or nothing. It's not. It's like the question I asked you about the internet, all or nothing. I think there is a middle ground there. And you talk to anyone who's raising kids now, and if they unless they're like a single mom who has to work all day, their parents are limiting screen time. And I think that's a good thing to do. Our kids, it's interesting. Our kids grew up on Sesame Street, and they grew up on the Electric Company, and this very, very, very good children's programming on television. How is that different from the internet? Well, it's different in that it was at a specific time during the day. It was scheduled, and it was not open-ended. And it was not driven by profit. We haven't talked about how capitalism is devouring the media in this country, including public television, by the way. Sesame Street was publicly funded by Congress and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It was then purchased by HBO, and the company that just bought HBO is downsizing Sesame Street, blah, 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 blah. But I think there is, if we're going to talk about, good and evil with screen time and not, and technology, I think it's a spectrum.
Yeah, it is. And, I asked Craig Baldwin once, the question I'll ask you next time is, I read that film as an art form has been swindled by capitalism. And he said, and it's our job to swindle it back. And I'm like, we don't want to become our enemy, do we?
Well, elections have consequences. And if you look at where, all the bold stuff was being in the 1960s, early 1960s, was being done on public television and in art theaters and in nonprofit places like Canyon Cinema.
Yeah.
public television, which was the main player in that big set of drivers of bold material, public television's just been, you know, terrorized and dismantled and commercialized by Congress.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I do voter registration, is to get that funding back to support independent film work like at ITVS and all the various venues within public television where there's a little bit of freedom left now.
Brilliant. I'm all for you. And I did many years of public access, and that was an amazing phenomenon that you could have.
Yeah, I mean, you. I don't think you've been consumed by capitalism. I don't see a whole lot of ads running. With
Well, no, I am deeply influenced by Frank Zappa, and he says I'm a devout capitalist, but he basically made his money and then put it back into writing more music.
Yeah.
And it was culturally stunning. But I want to tell you this instant, because you have kids, and the fact they grew up watching TV. And I went to probably the greatest movie theater on the planet. It's the Academy's new theater. Have you been to them?
Been there.
Okay, so they have 2 theaters, and I went to the one a year ago and saw Sans Soleil on the big screen.
Oh.
And that was cool. I know. I mean, we could talk about Sans Soleil forever. Jay Rosenblatt actually says the best thing about Sans Soleil. I says, "Did that infect you?" And he goes, "It influenced me because I imagined how Chris Marker made it. I didn't study every Chris Marker book and figured out how he made it. It caused me to imagine how he made it." So that's like what art should do. It's like stimulate you. So I saw Chris Marker there a year ago, and then they were showing the Nam June Paik documentary free through LACMA, which is next door. And it's in the big theaters in a geodesic, Bucky Fuller Dome. It's got a little bit of a creepy feel as you walk in, because there's like tons of like guards who are young people who are welcoming you. "Oh, are you here for the film?" And then you walk a couple more. "Oh, are you here for the film?" So it just I have that thing that Warhol said so well. There's nothing more bourgeois than dissing the bourgeois. But when I go to these big art museums like the Hammer and LACMA, I have this creepy feeling. They're showing subversive art, but it's like, so I sit down and watch the Nam June Paik, who's one of the great subversive artists of all time, who was a rich kid who saw John Cage and says, "Oh, I could take a hammer and beat up a piano," but he really did great art. And as soon as the film starts, a younger woman next to me whips out her cell phone. And I, in my space, go like this, a gesture. She turns to me and says, "Shut the uck up." She literally, so she kind of broke 2 protocols: using your cell phone and talking in a movie theater. Now, the woman who introduced the film said nothing about using your cell phones. And
go ahead.
Yeah, well, one friend said, "Oh, well, they should make an announcement and say, if you have to use your cell phone for the next 2 hours, then leave the theater now." And they would go, "Fuck you. I'm not going to leave the theater, because I've been through this being a curator for movies for 40 years. 10 years ago, I used to say, don't use your cell phone. Now they literally, people have mutated, our age and younger. They can't watch a 2-hour film unless they have access to their cell phone. So it's give up. You can't change it. So I'm just wondering your feelings on that. Am I like, no, we just got to go along with the mutation? What I did as soon as she said that, I just moved 4 seats over. It had nothing to do with her. It was me. But I don't want a flashlight flashing in front of my face during a movie.
Well, there are two things that are interesting about that. First, that she told you to shut up when you had not said anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other, I think it's complicated by the fact that it's a Nam June Paik show. Right.
It's very complicated because that's the punchline. Hey, I'm learning how to be a subversive artist. That's what he would have done, shot a movie off a movie. And I'm like, well, why don't you learn about him for 90 minutes? Then go do your subversive art.
Oh, so she was filming the
Well,
documentary.
she could have been doing many things. You know,
Okay.
one time I had it out with a guy and he was playing chess in the midst of a 10-minute film. And I
Well, no,
said, yeah,
yeah, I think it's just bad behavior, and it's bad behavior because it disrupts the experience for everyone
yeah.
else. I mean, I don't
I
mind if
know it, but
I
I
don't.
don't think anyone else complains. They know if you complain, they're going to fucking shoot you or,
Yeah,
yell out. And, someone said, well, go get the house manager. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that because I don't want her to know that I got the house manager to
yeah.
do that,
I mean, if she wants to piss away her own experience of the Nam June Paik documentary, that's her business. But if in by doing that she's destroying the experience for those around her, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyways, John, what an amazing time. I really appreciate this.
well, it's been great fun.
And I thank you for your important films. I mean, you didn't just make great films, you made important films. They
Well,
mean a lot. And it is beautiful that another thing I want to delve into is education, that you said, hey, I can be an educator as well and not just make films. You can,
yeah, we should talk about that next time for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, so put it on the calendar. Just send me a date, and I'll we can slay the dragon once again.
Thank you so much, John. Even though I'm going to hit this end broadcast button, I hope it never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.